Hello, everybody. This is Bill McDonald, the Reading and Writing Doctor. Welcome to CREST Online Recorded Trainings, parts 3, 4, and 5. This is going to be lesson 9 for more of you middle school teachers. When I looked at the sample tests, the most difficult passage was a paired passage about an unfinished painting of George Washington and an unfinished piece of writing by J.R. Tolkien that was finished by, I believe it was his son. And so, because in my personal opinion, the paired passages are the most difficult ones, I thought I would do my part 9, my part 3, 4, 5, lesson 9 on constructed responses using a paired passage. Lesson 10 will be the two short answer 2-point questions, and lesson 11 1 will be on the one extended essay sample that I did, and then you're going to see these. You'll see lesson 9 this evening, and I'll send you lesson 10 and 11 for those of you that are watching a delayed version. Of course, you're going to get them all at the same time, but the ones that are getting them live, you notice that I've spread them out over time to give you time to analyze and kind of dig in and pick and choose the ideas that you think are going to be best for you. If at any time you have a question, feel free to message me on my Facebook, or you can email me at that email address above my shoulder, writing_doctor@yahoo.com. My website is www.therightprescription.com. But if you ever message me and you want a direct link to something, sometimes it's hard to navigate websites, but I can send you directly to a certain product or a certain page. And if you're a Teachers Pay Teachers person, where a lot of times your district doesn't let you buy from a specific vendor or consultant, but they do have an open contract where you can do something through Teachers Pay Teachers. Anything that I can sell you on my website, I can also sell you on my Teachers Pay Teachers page. What you'll get is I'll be advertising it at a price that's digital and hard copy. So what you'll have to just do is email me uh, once you order through a Teachers Pay Teachers page. You just let me know if you can't find something, and I'll send a digital copy, but I'll also ask you to email me right there above so that you can get the hard copies of things if that's what you ordered was a hard copy in the description. So before we get started, I wanted to share my document camera screen with you because I was looking through my old rules acronym and I thought to myself, you know what, I want to make sure it's updated and applicable for a lot of the new test design questions. So as before, it still says rules, and it's broken down into 5 parts. The R being the appetizer of the meal, the U being the meat, they're both red, take notice of that. The yellow being the vegetable, the green being the other vegetable, and the blue S being the dessert, RULES. Okay. And if you haven't heard me say this before, I don't believe in cubes or any other acronym that doesn't require you when you're taking the entire test. I'm not just talking about a short answer acronym or an extended essay acronym. I don't believe in restating If you're going to ask me, should I do race? No, not if it stands for restate for every single student. I want you to rephrase and reflect on the question so you can give a higher level response than just regurgitating all the exact words. So let's see how I changed my rules of reading to kind of more align with the online testing. We should still read each question red light, and it's S monkeys. You guys all have monkeys if you're in the online training. Sentence or sentences, section singular or plural, stanza singular or plural, scene singular plural, selection singular or plural because there's two different, paragraph singular plural, or passages singular plural, and reading them solo. When you're first reading everything, when you're first mentoring with students, read everything loudly as a class, being the teacher and the entire class, and even read medium loudly when you're reading in a group. When you start working with partners, then read a little softer so that you can hear each other, but make sure both people or all three people in the partnership are reading softly. And then when you're solo testing, when you're testing by yourself, either use a whisper phone or cover one ear, cover both ears. Um, you might have speech to text where you'll be able to listen to the passage, and so you'll be able to hear with the headphones. So those are all different options. And I think the speech to text might be only available for students who have that modification, but for those who don't, you can still use whisper phones. And because silence is deadly in a classroom of auditory learners. So if you have one group reading loudly, then have the rest of the class read softly. If you have one person reading loudly, then have the rest of the class read softly. That way, they're all seeing and saying, hearing, listening, thinking, and analyzing. Because because we're not going to be able to underline if they don't fix all of the online testing problems that cause crashes. We'll have to use the U to understand the important words and details for what is being asked in the question, because most of them are going to be questions, all of them except for one. The extended essay will be a topic, and it won't have a question mark. It will have a period asking your students to explain something, and most of them are going to have demands. In other words, not just one task, but two tasks. In other words, if my top of my head is my topic, and the topic has two ideas in it, then your student's central idea statement would have to have not one, but two parts. The same thing if it was a topic for sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, their controlling idea statement would have to have two parts, and the same thing for ninth and 10th grade. And so make sure your kids understand that they're going to um, have to break apart the topic on the extended so they can understand, and that way they can actually label by highlighting. Now, ideally, and in my Zoom trainings, I'm going to be highlighting anything to do with the questions or the topic in red, and all of the related relevant details and evidence from the selections in yellow. Okay, and I'll explain that in a moment. The E, if you want to get a 2, you answer the question that they ask for the red light, and usually it will be in the form of a sentence for the short answer, and you give evidence. So you've got to decide of all of the evidence that's there in the selection, which example or examples of evidence will be the best for the answer that you choose to give. But remember the topic, the question, and the answer and the evidence all have to tie together. They all have to relate to each other. Okay. If you want to get a 3 when you're doing the extended essay response, you give the answer, red light, to whatever the topic is. You give the evidence, look at all the evidence, and decide which examples are going to be the easiest to explain if you're a struggling writer, so that you can get a 3. And keep in mind that the more examples of evidence that you use, the harder it's going to be to try and explain them all and make them all work well. So if your students don't have that skill, just have them pick one, give an example, one or two examples of evidence in the whole thing, and just explain those, and that will be much easier. Now, if you're trying to get 3s and 4s, you pick the examples of evidence that maybe you think less students would think about, because and when I'm saying 3 and 4, I'm combining the idea that you have the fourth and the fifth point are based on your editing and your revising, which is the ER here. Take your paper to the ER. If you want to get a stronger, you have a better chance of getting the 3 for the development. Don't just explain your answer with your evidence, explode it with higher vocabulary, have effective word choice, because part of the conventions is your sentence structure and having good sentence boundaries. You're going to want, if you're trying to get the best chance, to think of an ending, the last 1 or 2 sentences that tie everything together. So if you think of your shoes that have laces at the bottom of your feet, then how is it going to be most effective that you wrap everything up by tying everything together? The T being the topic, and the transitions that you use, the central idea, controlling idea, or thesis that you used, the examples of the evidence, let me switch my fingers because that looks weird. The examples of the evidence that you use uh, to try and get 2s or 3s, then explode uh, with higher vocabulary. Then take your paper and that the E is the ending. How do you tie it all together? And then take your paper to the emergency room of editing and revising, and that's where your paper has the best chance of getting a 4 or a 5. And the cool thing about your hand, it has 5 fingers, and so there's 5 things that you do, and we'll focus on that more when we get to lesson 11. But lesson 9 is going to be deciding which answer choices on the constructed responses am I going to eliminate and try to explain in the best way possible, the ones that I'm not going to choose. And so I've added an S that says show some strategies on paper, but you can also, there is a notes section where you can write a few notes for each one, but you might want to erase as you go so you don't take that chance. We hopefully will never have the crossing situation again, but it's always a good idea to have your students ask for scratch paper, and show their strategies using their writing tools, pencils. They can ask you for highlighters. All of that should be in the room all year long so they can constantly be practicing asking for highlighters, regular pencils, colored pencils, whatever, and then lined paper and blank paper so that they can draw pictures or write words and then number their questions and let you see on paper what they're doing. And I would suggest that you give some credit, partial credit, for strategies that they actually take time to show, and subtract points for the students who don't show any strategies. Eventually, you'll select the correct answer or answers. Notice that whenever there's more than one correct answer, sometimes there's not just two things, but sometimes three or four things, and sometimes even five things that have to be dragged and dropped or moved around. And so it's important that your students select all the right things that are being asked of them and show why they're correct in their paper strategies or in their notes. And then once they're sure they've done every single question, they submit their online response. Now, I've attached for you guys a rough draft PDF. I've made several versions of this test. Again, I probably took about 20 or 30 hours for you guys putting this test together so that all of you, even you in elementary, I would suggest you're adult teachers, but you can practice doing these paired passages because that's what sixth grade got. And so uh, you're gonna see the attached file is the it's going to be uh, the the answer key for basically the passages, the constructed, the short answer, the extended essay, the paired passage, the answer keys, and little mini scoring guides, what can get each point. And so you can see that I've gone ahead and placed the numbers in here for you and the answer choices that are correct so that you don't have to be looking at the test. You can kind of compare it to what I have here for you guys. And every time that I post one online for you, I'll always have a PDF file for you like this so that you can have something to look at. So with that, I will stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to go ahead and share a portion of my screen so that I can go ahead and practice the test with you guys. So the instructions say read the next two selections. So it's real important that your students understand that they don't have just one selection to read, that they, and as soon as they see that, they have to understand that they're working on a paired passage. I don't like that yellow. Let me see if I can get a little bit brighter one. This one, the second row of my highlighting is a little bit better. Let's see how that works. Um, the next two selections, okay, and then choose the best answer for each answer document. And as always, I'm not going to read the passages first. I always feel like for kids who struggle, it's a better idea to kind of scan the passages. Okay, the first passage has a title called When You're Bored, Invent a Board Game. Uses a play on words of the word board. Okay, it has 5 paragraphs. Okay, that was the first page. I'm trying to get back inside the. It's not letting my mouse get inside. There it goes. mouse. The second passage has it doesn't have instructions because it just said to read both passages. So this one is about yo, check it out. So the first one was about board games, and these are specific board games, and you can see checkers on that paragraph, and then you can see chess down there in the last one. All right. So what I've done is try to make sure that if a question asks something about a specific section or stanza or line, I'll make sure that you don't have to go back and forth. On the test, you can see that you can always go back, and that's the way it's going to be on the online test too. But you can always go back. But because on the regular online test, the selection will be over here to the left, and the answers will be to the right. So what I made sure that I did was I made sure that the questions and the section or paragraph they were about were in the same place. I want you to remember that as of the December test for end of course students, the test will no longer be timed. So uh, on a paired passage, you don't have to kind of rush. In the old days, we had to finish in 5 hours for high school and 4 hours for everybody else. But now you have until the end of the school day. Hopefully, they'll specify when that is. So here's how a paired passage works. It says on this one, use when you're bored, invent a board game to answer questions 1 through 4. Okay. That means that you'll probably use the other passage to answer 3 or 4 more questions. And then watch what I do. If this is my left shoe and that's my right shoe, then they might say, okay, now we're going to see a couple of questions. How are they similar? And a couple of questions, how are they different? And so that's the trick. And the difficulty that happens on the short answer questions about both passages, you have to answer the question about both passages and give evidence. So you'd have to have basically 2 red lights and 2 yellow lights in order to get a 2, and you have to explain for both passages in order to get a 3. But don't worry, we'll worry about short answer and extended essay. We'll be skipping right over those questions. So as we read, since we're reading the question, right now, I will switch to highlighting that's red, okay? Based on the ideas in paragraph 2, so I only have to look at paragraph 2, and there is, as you can see, paragraph 2 is right here below. When you're bored, invent a board game. What is the most likely reason that many board games were invented around the same time as the Great Depression? So what are some important some important details? Okay. The most likely reason means why. Why were so many board games invented, created, thought up when? At around the same time as the Great Depression. And so your students might find words like that. So this is an event that took place, and these are about real people in real places. So hopefully your kids will quickly see that it's an informative text about a person and or an experience or an event or a place from the past. Okay. So as you look through there, and I I would say that what you would need to do is say, okay, well, what would be a reason that they would be inventing during the Great Depression? So I'm going to switch to yellow and say, okay, which evidence would I be able to use so that I can say, okay, I've got to answer the question because the answer choices are right here. And so if I remove my drawing so that you can see this, it's either to prevent people from getting too bored. So we'll look for if there's a lot of talk about boredom. Uh, so so that make sure your students are doing their best to track with their mouse that they can see their mouse moving. Their winners move three things: their eyes, their mouth, and as you can see here, their mouse. So boredom is going to be one of them. I'm bored. Boredom is an emotion. So I'm going to kind of do some things that I would teach your students, help them to understand that there are certain words that are going to come up: boredom and unemployed. So yes, so over in the lined paper on their paper, they could write the word bored and unemployed. People are bored because they're unemployed. So if that's why they invented the games, we'll pick it. Okay. Next thing, people, the subject again. Discouraged is another emotion. So I'm going to draw a little heart. Disillusioned is uh, discouraged to another level. Okay. About the Great Depression. So if we see here in my teeter-totter, because people were so discouraged and disillusioned, transition, they invented a lot of games during the Great Depression. Because they were so bored, uh, being unemployed, transition, they invented a lot of games. Next one. To hopefully also has to do with your heart, that you have hope for something positive. Create a means of income in a time of financial difficulties. Um, Means of income would be positive, something good that would happen. So we're going to say, if we do the teeter totter concept here, because of the Great Depression and the financial difficulties it created, transition, many people invented board games to create a means of income. And finally, the last one, there were not enough. Anytime somebody says there's that something is good, true or not true, there's not enough board games at the time that could distract people from the problems they were experiencing. So if the focus of the paragraph, if the big idea is they didn't have any games or not enough games to distract people, then we'd pick it. All right. So I'm gonna read and we'll see what we can highlight that would kind of create the best idea for the question. Why was it done during that time? So the important thing is the why and the when. The why and the when. All right. Two of the most popular board games during the 1900s, and my mouse is moving, my mouse is tracking here, were Monopoly and Scrabble. Okay. That's what they were. Both were created in the early 1930s during a time in America called the Great Depression. Okay. That's the when. So we got to figure out why. During that time period, times were really discouraging because a lot of people lost their jobs and many businesses went bankrupt. So uh, people lost their jobs, many businesses went bankrupt. Those were two effects of the Great Depression. So then they say, oh, let's give you a real world example. Alfred Butts was one of these people who struggled to find work and was trying hard to make money. Okay, so one of the answers was talking about trying to make money. He thoroughly enjoyed doing crossword puzzles, so one day he began putting the ideas together for a make it yourself game. For the next few years, he experimented every day without fail. He read the front page of the New York Times, a very word packed newspaper with a lot of teeny tiny print. He counted every single letter and kept a detailed chart of how often each letter was used. That way he could figure out how many letter tiles his game would need. It would be like trying to make a chart of how many times each letter of the alphabet appears on just this page alone. So if you say, if I can base Y on the only example that they gave us, I would probably use this. Okay. All this part right here was about Alfred Butt saying, you know what? I gotta make some money because of not having a job. He didn't have work, and he figured he could make some work by doing the games. All right. And they kind of said how he did it. So let me clear the drawings and go down here below. So if the focus was on boredom, no. Since they didn't focus on boredom, that were that was only in the title up here. When you see here where my mouse is pointing, when you're bored, invent a board game. If the whole that was about the title, but it wasn't about paragraph 2, because so many people were discouraged and disillusioned about the Great Depression. Okay, so that one could be an answer. People were discouraged, but you have to decide which is a better cause and effect. Because they're discouraged and disillusioned, they're going to invent uh, some games during the Great Depression. I think when I'm discouraged and disillusioned, I'm not going to do anything. So I need to compare it though to something else to hopefully create a means of income in times of financial difficulties for the creators. Okay, one of the creators was this um, guy who was inventing the game of Scrabble. So it sounds like that one is a better choice than letter B. There were not enough board games at the time. There was nothing mentioned since they didn't say anything about that. What your kids can do is they can basically, in their minds or on their paper, uh, write something that makes the answer not true. And then because the best answer is letter C, we're going to go ahead and go with that one. Okay, clear the drawings, go with the next question. As you can see here, what I've done, and I'll make sure that you can see it on the previous one. I want to show you something important that I did for you. Not only did I go ahead and uh, give you questions in constructed format, I went ahead and looked for the most difficult questions in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade because my focus was for you guys this time around, and said, let me ask a question that was similar to the questions that were asked. And so what you can do is you can go to the 2021 sixth grade test that only 48% of the kids in Texas got correct, and look at question number 15, a category 3 readiness question, student expectations 6.5F. Okay, that's where I got it from. Okay, so I did that every single time as I was doing the constructed responses. I even did it for the short answer and the extended, but of course, instead of making it multiple choice only, I did the constructed, the short answer, and the extended essay responses. So when you look at number 2, we've already answered number 1, so we'll click next again. Okay. Looking at the question this time. So if we think of the question as the red light, what is the most likely reason, again, the why, the author included the information about the amount of time that he spent creating the game. So it was the same paragraph about how much time. Okay. So the most important word, if you look at it, the amount of time. So the who is Harold, the Alfred Butts character. Okay. The time is the important part of this question. What would be the most logical reason? And it's a short constructed response. So I'm going to skip that. And as you can see there, I went ahead and labeled it for you. And so we will look at this one in question in lesson number 10. And as you can see here, it says type your answer here, but I want you to notice, even though in Texas you only get 475 characters, the program that I use to make my test allows for 2,500, but just make sure your kids know that when they subtract 475 from 2,500, they will need to have, they'll need to have a little over um, 2,000 characters left, because if you subtract 475 or 500 from 2,500, then you get 2,000. So as your kids are typing on my tests, just make sure on these short answers they try to have about 2,000, a little over 2,000 characters left, so they don't go over their response. On the extended essay, I've not gone even close to the 2,300 that's going to be allowed on the extended essay, so I don't think your students will either. All right, let's look at number 3. It's a text entry, so that is one that we will do. It came from 7th grade, uh, question 24, and it only got 44%. It says, read the 2 sentences below. So not one sentence, but read 2 sentences in bold below. From where? Paragraph 4 of the same one. The dark secret was that Darrow stole the idea from a 1904 game called The Landlord's Game, which had been created by a writer named Elizabeth Maggie. And my final draft, I need to remove the comma. Make sure you mention that to me. As always, we're working on our final drafts together as I do these. Now, stealing something is a negative connotation of somebody. So if we talk about his character, stealing is bad. All right. So he did an action, and so it it needs to affect the reader's view of him. The other one, it was also invented during the Great Depression. So I'm gonna highlight that. Okay. A couple of important words. There was a dark secret. Okay. Whoever this guy is, Darrow, he stole an idea from a game. Okay. And when you read the paragraph, he stole the idea of the game Monopoly from this lady. All right. It was also invented during the Great Depression, again, because people needed to make money, but there is a slightly sinister story behind its creation. Okay. Again, I'm thinking here, because sinister is somebody's opinion, I I would want to make sure um, I would highlight that. So now we see again the author, whoever wrote this informative piece, feels like that was a sinister idea to steal someone's creation. So let's look at the question uh, using context clues. And this is similar to one of the sixth grade questions. So I figured I would put it in there for you. It says, using the context of the two sentences above, the word blank provides the best clue about the author's negative opinion of how Darrow got the idea for creating the game Monopoly. Okay. Now, the keywords, what are the most important keywords in the question? The author has a negative opinion of who? How Darrow got the idea. Okay. A negative opinion, if I was writing on my paper, I would write negative opinion, or I would put in my notes negative opinion, and on my paper for next to a three, I would put negative. So I've got to figure out of all the things that I highlighted, which word is the most negative. Um, dark secret, stole, sinister. Because sinister is pretty high vocabulary, then hopefully your students would be able to gather the idea that that one would be the one that would best show the author's negative and that's so sinister. It was a dark secret, but it doesn't show that's not doesn't show as much of a negative. He stole something is an action, but the only time that the author gave his opinion was using the word sinister. So I've erased my drawings. I wrote the word sinister, and what you might have your kids be careful to do on all these text entry ones is double check the spelling. I would hate for them to get an answer wrong because they um, carelessly spelled a word. Because if this part is checked by computer, maybe it's better to right click on it. Let me see if this allows me to do it. And then click Control V, paste. And so it worked on mine. So hopefully the same thing would work and that your the computer would mark that answer correctly because it just has to match the word. That wouldn't need to be scored by a human. Right? What kind of question do we have here? All right, I'm gonna move my face away from here. Oh, there it is. It says an inline choice. Select the answer from a drop-down menu. I'm gonna look at my folder for a second. That one is when you look at your writing folder, number 3. Okay. Based on paragraph 5. Okay. And what did I do for you guys? I went ahead and included paragraph 5 inside the same place. So with my tests, you're not going to have to go back and forth. You'll be able to just have to look at the section that I've given you. But as I did share with you, if your kids actually want to go back, you can click the back arrow and go back all the way to paragraph 5 if you need to. Okay. What can the reader infer about how this information affected the family of Elizabeth Maggie? Now remember Elizabeth Maggie is the person who um, invented the first version of the Monopoly game, and so we found that out in a different paragraph. And so what we're going to read in paragraph 5 is okay. Well, how is that going to affect her? Uh, So the question is, how can you infer? So infer means I need to be able to read between the lines, between all of these lines. Okay. So I'm going to read some sentences for you. Monopoly has now been translated into 47 languages and is played in 114 countries. Okay. How is that going to affect Elizabeth, Maggie? Um, it doesn't say. There's no direct connection there. It was sold to another company named Hasbro and has sold more than 275 million copies to date. Okay. So if they sell something that now belongs to someone else, you're not going to get the money for that. So that could be one of the answers. If the average game cost over all of the years of its existence was about $5, the game would have grossed approximately $1,375,000,000. That's how much money it would have been. Now, how is that going to affect Elizabeth Magi or Maggie or Maggie? I mean, she's not going to get any of that money because some dude stole her idea. Scrabble and Monopoly are now the number 4 and 5 best-selling board games. So hers was the old version of Monopoly. So she would have had one of the top selling board games if somebody else would have discovered her and given her the credit. The only 3 board games that are purchased by more people today are chess, checkers, and backgammon in that order. So what they're saying is Scrabble and Monopoly are the number 4 and number 5 sellers. How would that affect Elizabeth? She's not going to get any of that money. So I'd have to pick an answer that has something to do with that. Her family lost the opportunity of becoming wealthy. What does that mean? Getting rich because of Daro stealing their version of the game. I think that's the answer. So I'm going to lock it in right now, but I am going to check the other ones. Her family was very upset. When I looked through the passage, the family, it appears, didn't even have any knowledge of that. So I would have to make sure um, of that. But when you look at paragraph 5 alone, it doesn't say anything about the family finding out and getting upset. So you can't infer that. They were very knowledgeable and wise because of their ability to translate her game. No, it wasn't her. That was somebody else that did that, not her family. They became extremely rich because of her invention of the landlord games. No, they 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 never gave her credit for it, so she can't get rich if the guy who stole the idea doesn't ever give her credit. So the best answer for that one is the one that we chose, that first one, that the family lost the opportunity. I'm going to clear my drawings. Uh, Click next. Let's check, see what kind of question it is. It is, I think, multi-part with question 6. And so what I've done on this version of the test, I want you to understand that when you have your students do it, I went ahead and put them separately, even though um, the, the, the state ones will put them together, just so that your students can understand that if one question, um, part A, is correct, then you can see if part B is correct to give the credit. If part A, this one right here, number 5, is wrong, then we don't get credit for number 6 either. So if you look here, it says it very plainly in my explanations to make sure that you and the student understand. Question 5, this one here, must be correct to give credit for a correct answer in question 6. So let's read the question. How is information presented about the game of checkers in paragraph 1 through 3 of Yo Check It Out important to the organization of the selection? So uh, as you noticed, we graduated to the other passage, and there's 3 of the paragraphs. In fact, I think that's the entire passage. Okay. So what I did for you, so that you can, instead of having to read it, you're gonna see there's a lot of information, And so what I mentioned about taking notes, um, if you use, and I'll stop sharing from the computer for a second and I'll come back to it. I'm going to share my document camera real quick and show you what I did so that you could see part A from part question 5 and part B from question 6. In paragraph 1, it says that the the game called checkers um, was look at something real quick. I don't want to steer you wrong here. Share the screen, uh, portion of the screen again. Um, Paragraph 3. The Americans called it checkers, and I want to make sure because I think I ended up calling it the wrong name. That's what I was trying to check real quick. Um, when I share the screen, so that's a very good example of writing carefully. So in paragraph 1, they said, and they were asking about checkers, not about chess. It was done over thousands of years, and the Mesopotamians were just using little discs in their form of checkers. In Egypt, they had it help them uh, determine who was going to win wars. In the Islamic Empire, it was purely for amusement, and then it went from there to Spain and to France and India, where they called it kinging instead of checkers. And then it went to the English, and they called it the draughts, and Americans, because they use it on the checkerboard, they called it checker. They called it checkers. The reason I have the word chess there, I was accidentally reading ahead, and chess is mentioned in the fourth paragraph. So be careful. So we have to. There's how it was organized. So basically, it has to do with all of the different groups and the way that the game developed. So this is using the who's on first sequence ladder. Anytime they're asking for the order of events or the order of things that happen. And so part A is going to have something to do with um, all of these years that the game kept changing. And if you notice, I highlighted part B because what they're going to say is get whatever your answer is, all I need is you to prove it. What's the evidence using at least one of them? And so when we get to question 6, the evidence you're going to see is just one of them. What's one of the examples of how the game changed over the years? So let me show that to you inside the passage. All right. It shows how, through a real timeline, how much the French people despise the English. Since the French people despised the English in in this paragraph right here, that would only be one sentence. And they asked about how an entire section was organized, the first 3 paragraphs. So I would eliminate that one because the words the French and despising the English, that is only written about in paragraph 3. Okay. It shows how popular and addicting the game of checkers could be, regardless of what country. Because of the word popular, there was nothing mentioned about the word popular opinion or that it was addicting. Those were points of views and opinions. since it was just facts information when the when and where the game moved and progressed. I can eliminate that because there was nothing based on, if you look at me here in the corner, my heart and my head connection. There were no feelings, emotions, thoughts, or opinions. It was just historical sequence, except for that one detail of the French not really liking the English. So let's look at C. It reveals over time uh, people from different places, yes, and cultures, yes, contributed to the final version of how the game of checkers, they all contributed to the final version, how the game of checkers transformed to the way it is played now by the Americans. So since all those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of the puzzle are true, more than likely, I would be selecting letter C. All right. I'm going to clear my drawing so you don't get confused. Now we've got to decide, because the E is to eliminate. Why? Let me explain what words could I cross off, which words could I highlight, and what you can do is maybe you can highlight if it allows you different color highlighting. Great, then you can use different colors to represent yes and no's. Since the highlighting is a very limited thing that you can do on the test. Checkers was more popular than chess because chess was not mentioned in paragraphs 1 through 3, as you can see here. Um, except for one detail, they borrowed the India's chess like game, and they called it King, but the checkers was played on a chessboard. They were talking about checkers there. So they weren't saying any, again, they weren't expressing an opinion. They weren't comparing and contrasting how popular two games were. So that makes that answer incorrect. And so the best one indeed is the progression of the uh, game of checkers over time. All right. Do that so I can click my mouse, click next, multi-part, okay? And I said, all I need is give me, if that is the answer that's true, I just need one example of evidence that is true. It's a straightforward, simple game. That wasn't part of the history, paragraph 1, that the English hated anything that came from the French people. That was not part of the history of the game. When Muslim invaders reached Spain, they brought the game with them, and it soon spread to neighboring France. Ancient Egyptians had a lot of battles, so the Muslims uh, brought the game with them. In paragraph 2, that was the one I highlighted. And so, because that is an example of the evidence of the history of the game, then I would get credit for that answer and the one before. Number 7, regular multiple choice. I wanted to throw a couple of those in there for you just to practice. Okay. Because remember, 75% of the questions are going to be like box number 1 on your folder, where it's regular multiple choice. This came from an 8th grade question, okay? An 8th grade question that only got 42% correct. If you look at question number 34 from the 20, and some people are going to be asking me, so I'll say yes. I'm going to make my own passages based on the 2022 test, but first I promised I would make a practice test in star format, online format, uh, but instead of doing it uh, with all multiple choice, I'll have one extended, I'll have one or two short answer questions, and then I'll have several multiple constructed responses so that your kids can practice And because it's going to have to be part of the test, I'll make sure I add, because the none of the tests from 3 through 8 had any editing or revising. I'll make sure that I add at least one passage of editing and revising, if not two, to your release test, so that your students can get a full version of what their test is going to look like in online format. So, what is the most likely reason? So again, here they're asking for a why, that the author wrote the selection, go check it out. Okay. And that one was about chess and checkers. All right. Chess and checkers. Okay. So if I clear my drawings and I take you back, if you're confused, got my mouse here. You click back. There's the checkers, but when they ask you about the whole passage, it says use yo, check it out. Let's see if all the paragraphs are here. No. So I'm gonna go all the way back to the beginning. Thanks for your patience. It's this next page here. Before question number 1. All right, yo, check it out. You can see that there's 4 passages. And so what I want you to notice is paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. And what I'll do to make it easier for you, when I send you this version, I'll go ahead and include uh, the whole passage inside the question, so you won't have to go back to these. When you look at all of them, you're going to notice that they were basically talking about the history of checkers in paragraphs 1 through 3, and the history of chess. Compared to checkers, chess is relatively new. The history of chess in paragraphs 4. So, what the same thing that they did for um, notice that my answers stay there that I chose. And when you see your test version of this, uh, you'll see that on that question, I'll go ahead and include all of the all of that second passage inside that question for you. That'll be on question number 7. Okay, because I want to make sure you have it the same way. And so, to describe 2 ways people can come together to enjoy themselves, because that answer is too vague. Okay, they weren't really talking about enjoyment. They were just talking about the history, factual information. Enjoying is a heart connection. Uh, because of the word convincing, there was no convincing done in the entire time that they're the best. And we said that opinion words, I'm going to think of opinions in, in blue. Anytime that you say an opinion uh, based on the author's viewpoint, um, they weren't trying to convince us that they were the best games. They just happened to be the most popular, but they weren't trying to do any convincing. It wasn't persuasive at all. It was informative. So your kids have to know the difference between those kinds of words. To detail the history of the game of checkers, since that's only got one part, paragraphs 1 through 3, I would eliminate that. It was and when you explain why, it was the history of checkers and chess. So detail the history of checkers and chess and how popular these board games are still in the world today. And that part is true because, like as I mentioned, the number 1 and number 2 selling board games of all time, at least board games, are chess and checkers. Here are my drawings. Go forward. So you'll, in when you take your own test after watching this video, which I always want you to do first, you'll see question 7 with the passage. In fact, I'll write that uh, on my notes. Question 7, um, include passage. All right, there we go. Thanks for your patience. All right, what is this kind of question? Select 2 answers. So in other words, on the test, I want to make sure you understand this on grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. It said that your students are going to get only 2 2-point questions. That means that it's either A and B, part A and B, one point for part A and 1 point for part B. It's going to be this type right here, that there's going to be 2 correct answers, or that it's going to be a short answer response. Those are the only constructed responses that get you 2 points. There could be hot text with 2 points. So there's several different ways that I've seen it. So just be aware that more than likely one of them, and this is just my guess here, one of the responses will be short answer where your kids will have to write the answer to a question in a complete sentence for the red light. And I have 2 of those that we're going to be doing. So have no fear. We're about to get to the first one. It says the king and queen had open work crowns. Okay. So it sounds like they're giving us details. So if I again go back to practicing the format of the test with highlighting, then if I have the choice, I would highlight things about the question in red. Okay. The king and the queen, that's my subject. What about them? They had open work crowns. The bishop had a deep cleft mine. So basically, that's what it looked like. And the rook was a tower on a pedestal. So they were describing how they look. All right. And so since that was mentioned in paragraph 4, as you can see here, the paragraph about chess, what 2 things are true based on them describing these chess pieces? A, that the chess pieces are in the game of chess were invented with the idea to attract people of royalty. Okay, the king and queen. Since only the king and the queen were people of royalty, I don't think that they were using that to explain the purpose of this sentence, because it says just this sentence. So based on that sentence alone, it doesn't say they're trying to get people to play it if they're people of royalty. That John Calvert, this is the guy who made the game, played an important role in how chess pieces are designed even to this day. Okay. Because that was the way that he designed them in that paragraph. That is one of the answers. Because the game was designed based on the idea of all time. So it's not trying to get rich people to play it, but because you get to pretend like you're a rich person, then that's the reason. No, it didn't give any cause and effect. It was basically how the chess pieces look. The pieces in chess are much more unique. What does unique mean? Different than the pieces in checkers in the way they're designed. Well, unique as in the king and queen look one way, the bishop looks a different way, and the rook. So those are 3 examples of things that are true. So if I would base it on that, if they were to read before, and what I want you to notice that even though John Calvert is not mentioned in the sentence, what I think what happens is that a lot of students, if they don't look at any sentences before to see why things are there, okay, I want you to notice something here. The eighth grade question, it got less than 46%. I'm noticing that sometimes what they're going to ask your students to do is, if the question is the red light, if they don't do this, and I'm going to kind of show you with yellow and red, if they don't go backwards doing the Michael Jackson moonwalk, or if they don't check a little bit forward doing the MJ Fox Back to the Future, sometimes they won't be able to understand what that sentence is about. And so what I'm noticing is that because many students only looked at that sentence because the keywords in the question said, and let me highlight that for you so you can see what I'm talking about. It said, which two details in the question, turn that red, which two details in the question, in this, does this sentence help the reader understand? And so the reason that most of your students got it wrong is they did not read anything before the sentence or after it. And in order to get the answer correct last year, I'm sorry, in 2021, the students had to read a couple of sentences before the one being asked about it. They had to read it in the context of the paragraph, not the sentence by itself. So keep that in mind as you're choosing your answer. Okay. So I think we have one more question. And we're gonna call this and I kind of had to be creative in the way that I did it. As you can see here, it's the kind of question, if you look here, hot text, that you look at a paragraph, and so what's going to be what your students will see is that a whole section will be highlighted, and then your students will just have to click the one that's true. Okay. And so they're either going to ask for one or they'll ask for two answers. And so we have to check because it says answer the question or select the correct answer or answer. So it says which of the four details from the selection, yo, check it out. And that's that section down here. I see four details down there. So just so we don't get confused, this is the yo, check it out section. Which one of those below best shows? Okay, that's an important word. So if that means that there's a couple that can show something, best shows a similarity to what? The idea in bold. Where's the idea in bold? Here it is. All of this right here. That is presented in paragraph 4 of the selection when you're bored and meant to board game. Hot text, cite the evidence. So basically, how are the two ideas similar? Okay, well, let's first look at the one that's already given to us. The landlord game had its name changed to Monopoly. Uh, the guy changed the name to Monopoly, probably so that the lady would never find out. And he changed even the location to Atlantic City, New Jersey, but they didn't ask us that. Okay. So, which one is the most similar to having the name change? Because all of the things are going to be in the paragraph there, but they're going to say, okay, when you change the name of something in one passage, we want something that's similar in the other passage, changing the name of something else. So as we look through the answers, erase all the drawings. A similar game was used by High Priest. Okay. Um, a similar game in paragraph 1. Uh, Nothing was changed, so I don't think similar game, maybe. So I'll put a question mark. The French were the first to play what became known as checkers on a chessboard. Since they're not changing the name, they're just using the chessboard to play chessboard to play checkers. That's not really changing the name. The French decided to rename the game Droughts. So changing the name here, when you notice the comparison, when you change the name, and these people say rename the game. So in the game of Monopoly in the other passage that used to be called something else, and the French decided to change the game of checkers to droughts, then that's so far the most similar when you compare both passages. They add a new twist to the game called kinging. Okay, so a lot of people, a lot of students would probably pick this one. So let me show you something. Because of the word twist, basically a twist to a game is a rule, a step, a procedure. And so when you look at the third answer, changing the name versus uh, the fourth answer, just changing one of the rules of the game to kinging, the one that's closer, the more similar one, the best one, it said, is when you actually rename something. So what we're going to do is we're going to clear the drawings, and what I'll do is click on my mouse so that I can copy. And so what you're going to have is you'll have 4 or 5 of them highlighted. And so all I'm doing is highlighting it myself, uh, so that you can see how it works. And then I'm just gonna, I right clicked copy, and then where you type your answer, um, your kids would just click on it and then click next. But I did it in the way that your your kids would basically make the text hot themselves by copying it. And so changing the name of the game is the correct answer. And so that's how I would do that one. And let's see, this number 10 is a short answer. So as I mentioned, we'll do the 2 short answers in uh, lesson 10. So I'll skip that one. And question 11 is text entry. So I believe this is the last one that we're going to do in this video, because question number 12 is the extended essay response. So let's check and see. How is the creation of Alfred Butt's game, okay, Alfred Butt is the guy that did the game Scrabble, in When You're Bored, Invent a Board Game, unlike, as we're comparing across passages, the steps in the process of the creation. Oh, I'm sorry. This is um, how is it unlike? And so I just text entry means you just need a sentence, okay? And so they're only going to give us one sentence. So Alfred's Butts game, I'm going to give you 2 important sentences, okay? And here's what they are. That his game uh, was just invented mainly by him and some other guy who bought his game from him, and they made some changes to improve the game. And then the other one, um, uh, the Yo Check It Out, remember, was made by a whole bunch of people and created by a whole bunch of people. And the other way you could answer it is that Alfred Butt's game just took a year or two to create, whereas the game of checkers was changed and rechanged over thousands of years. Okay, so I will type, and what you need is just one answer or the other. So text entry um, is writing a. Let me read it to you from my folder so you can hear how it sounds in the way that they describe it. Text entry is a string of text, a number, a word, a phrase, or a sentence. And so I'm going to write a sentence or two, a string of text. All right. So Alfred Butt's game only took a few years. Okay. What to create, invent, while checkers was designed or changed over because they used 3000 BC over thousands of years. Okay, the years, and that would be an acceptable response. And again, these text entry ones are probably going to be similar. The short answer is what I'm told, and the essay, the extended essay responses for sure are going to have to be read by humans. Uh, I'm going to guess that maybe some of these text entry ones, because maybe the computer is not always going to be able to predict what the student is trying to say. I want to ask them, are the text entry questions going to be graded by a human as well? Because as you see in my answer here, that it's entirely possible that the computer won't pick up or understand everything that I'm trying to say. Where did that question come from? As you're reading along each time, it's the sixth grade, came from sixth grade. A little over half of the students got a question like that. How are two different uh, details from two passages? How are details from two different passages different? Because remember, we said when we take the two passages, we're going to have a couple of questions about how they're the same, and a couple of questions about how they contrast, how they compare, transition, and contrast. So that's what I would put. And then you're going to see that this last one that we'll do on lesson number uh, 11, I'll go ahead and guide you through this one. Um, this extended essay response with the answers that I chose, some how to get lower points, and we'll work on those in our next two videos. The two short answer questions will be in the next video, lesson 10, and the extended essay will be in the lesson 11. And what I'll do to save us some time, these are in here, as you can see, and your students would have to type their own responses, okay? And they'll have to have what I suggest that you do is, because the PDF that I send you has the actual test, so your students won't have to be going back and forth. What I would recommend that you do is print out a copy. But what I'm trying to do as much as possible is, if when the questions are about an entire passage, then I'll try to make sure the entire passage shows up in the question. If it's about two, so this question 12 that you'll see, and I'll do those on paper, uh, so that you can see the different colors, because when I'm doing typed response. And again, these are worth 10 points. Um, and basically, they give you a little bullet. So you can see here, um, the student rubric basically says how to get a 1, how to get a 2, organize, tie everything together. All the ideas have to relate to each idea. How to get a 3 is you have to do a combination of developing your ideas by using examples from the evidence. And in this case, not from one selection, but from both selections. The controlling idea slash thesis has to be from both selections. Notice that it says that. And so I'll make sure that your students will see both so they don't have to go back and forth. Um, and the other final thing is to get the 4 or the 5, the last finger, they have to have good spelling, capitalization, punctuation, grammar, and the rough draft rubric says sentence structure or sentence construction that has to be consistent. Um, and in order to get the 2 points, it would be somewhat consistent to get 1 point and inconsistent or poor to get 0 points. And then the other part is they make sure, as you can see, there's the 20, there's the space, and they're going to limit your students to 2,300. So just make sure that there's still 200 characters left if they decide to kind of get crazy. Review the selections, and they'll be there for your students. And you can print them out as well until you can get used to using all online. Make a plan. I have my train that I would use for the plan. I'm going to show you using the red light WWE, write out the response and then revise and edit. Well, I'll give you some suggestions on things that you can do differently if the paper makes a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or possibly a 4. So um, that concludes our lesson 9. Sorry for the length again, but like I mentioned, by the time I'm done with explaining everything, we're going to have over 100 hours of video and in terms of how to do all this monster of a change of the test. So uh, as you can see, it's pretty overwhelming for us as adults. So I'm going to predict that it's going to be pretty overwhelming for your students as well because of all the extra work that's involved with um, the constructed short answer and extended essay responses. So uh, let me know if you have any questions or suggestions. Um, we'll see you on our next video on short answer with paired passages for middle school / high school. These are pretty high level questions because of the way that it designed them. So I wanted to make sure that you high school teachers would be able to have a chance to get some. And so once we finish those, our next set of videos will be high school level constructed short answer and extended essay. But I'm going to be honest with you, anytime that you have a paired passage, they're always more difficult than the single passage selection. So I would suggest that you, as much as possible, stick to practicing with single passages before you start trying to compare and contrast across passages. Just my suggestion, because it's already hard enough with the new changes in the test to add uh, 2 passages at the same time to have to answer questions for. So just an idea to think about. Thanks and God bless.